Hi everyone, this is Charlize, and today's YouTube video will be about one of the most important topics in chess, and that is the endgame. But this video is specifically geared towards club level players, so if that's you, stick around and find out which books are best to level up your game with. So our first book is none other than 100 Endgames You Must Know by Jesus de la Villa. You have probably heard of this book. It is one of the most famous endgame books in chess, and that's because it's catered to so many different levels, and it covers really every endgame topic that you need to know, especially at this phase in your career. The explanations are good, the positions are perfect. Let's take a look at the sample just to see what exactly the table of contents entails. So we have quite a few chapters over here. As you can see, it ranges from basic endgames as a basic test, which is a good chapter to start with, and just test your knowledge, see where you're at. Queen and pawn, rook and two pawns, same colored bishops, bishop versus knight, opposite colored bishops, pawn and rook, just really everything that's important is included in this book. And then you've got final test positions, which just helps you kind of put all of your knowledge together and see if you were paying attention. Let's take a look at the book on forward chess. So we just saw all the topics. I want to kind of focus on key squares, which is important at this point because, of course, when you get into endgames, you learn about oppositions, the kings, and there are simple rules to follow. But as with most rules, sometimes there are exceptions, and these are also important to know. For example, let's start with the basic position. Here we are white, we want to promote our pawn into a queen. Our king has made it all the way, and it looks like it should be a sure win. But if we push this pawn over, suddenly it's stalemate. So counterintuitively, the solution here is to step back with the king. And this may seem kind of funny because weren't we taught to not allow our opponent to step into our position? Well, yes, but this is the exception because it is a knight pawn. Black's king moves over, and we switch on over to h6. If Black's king goes anywhere to the f-file, of course, our king can just come up, covering all squares. Let's use the highlight, covering all three squares, and the pawn can safely become a queen. Now, the next book I want to talk about is called Chess Endgames for Club Players. A very apt book for this video, just by the way, by Herman Grutten. We actually had an interview with Herman, which I'll also link down below. He's such an experienced author, has written many books, and he understands how to explain chess to club players, to advanced players, beginners as well, but I think he's got this niche of understanding what club players need. And that's exactly what this book gives you. It's a study on endgames. Let's take a look at the sample to see what the table of contents is all about. It looks a little bit more simplified. We have fewer chapters. He's got all kinds of topics from, again, your pieces versus your pawns, elementary stuff, technique to know in the endgames, and also interesting positions that might not be as straightforward, but they're good to understand the technique for. So if we head on over to the Forward Chess web app, let's decide which topic we will look at. I think queen and pawn is always a good one to know because, again, you have learned some basic things, but at this point in your career, you need to step it up and go a little bit more in depth of what's happening. The great thing about this book is it's got this section, Rules of Thumb, in every single chapter that there is, and it simplifies things for you. For example, if we take a look at this rather simple position, it explains the rule of thumb to you pretty well, and that's that if the queen is on the promotion square, you'll win, or if your king is close to the enemy pawn, you'll win most of the time. So let's take a look at this example position. Black is so close to promoting their pawn. We have a queen and a king. Of course, we don't want to give up our queen for the pawn because that's just a draw. So what to do here? Well, you can just in time travel give a bunch of checks, I suppose, but there is some technique here, and that starts with the move Queen E4 check. The idea here, and Herman explains it, is that even though our king is so far, we want our opponent's king to block the pawn to give us time to bring our king closer. And that's exactly what will happen. After king F2, the king tries to stay away from the pawn to not block it, but a move like queen D3 forces this. Again, technique here. King E1, queen E3 is the ultimate forcing move to get the black king to move, because now we're checking the king and we're attacking the pawn, so black has to do something. And after king D1, this gives us time to bring our king closer. This is basically a rinse and repeat setup that we're going to do. Queen E2, pinning the pawn that just never allow black to capture. Queen C4, now we've got our pattern of what we had earlier. King tries to move away from the pawn. Queen D3, making sure that pawn doesn't promote. King C1, again attacking the king and the pawn at the same time. So this is all just a pattern. And as soon as the king steps in front of the pawn, we bring our king forward. King E2, this is just going to be same thing, pattern. We can skip ahead a few moves because it suddenly becomes a little bit different when our king is suddenly coming closer. Because now it's different as our queen can give a closer check. We don't have to do the whole pinning the pawn right now. Our king is close enough, so white can simply play queen E3 check, king D1, and as usual, king is in front of the pawn, which gives us time to bring our king in closer. And we win the pawn like this. So the technique is explained here. By maneuvering in the right way, the queen forces the enemy king to stand in front of its own pawn to enable the attacking king to take a step closer. This process is repeated until the king of the queen side can help to capture the pawn or even give a checkmate, which is such a simple way of saying it, and I think it's very effective to learn endgames by yourself, or even if you're a coach, to use this material for these purposes. The final book I want to recommend is a book by Mark Dvoretsky, but it is not the one we all know, which is Dvoretsky's Endgame Manual. Although this is an incredibly amazing endgame book, I do think it is suited for a stronger level. Or, well, it's not just me. I've spoken to a lot of top players and coaches, and although the material is pretty good, it's just quite big and it can be overwhelming to learn endgames too. So I would say that this book can kind of be your final boss to lead up to. So study your basics, your endgames through these books, these recommended books, and gradually you can work your way to Dvoretsky. And Tragic Comedy in the Endgame, it's a cool book because it gives you games that errors were made in, some mistakes were made in, and it's very easy to make mistakes in endgames, well, chess in general. But making an endgame, an error in the endgame is, I suppose, more fatal because we don't have time to fix it as much. So as you can see, we've got all kinds of theoretical positions that are quickly looked over, but some interesting topics like activity of the king, selecting the path of the king, and why I like this book a lot. And let's take a look at it on the web reader. Why I like this book a lot is because it shows you what happens when things go wrong. And you can kind of work out for when things go right. For example, let's take a look at this position over here. It is a completely drawn position after a move like rook a6, just holding the position together. But in the game, Wolfgang Ullmann played a careless check, rook b5. And, I mean, checks, we will like giving checks every now and then. But in a critical endgame position, why is this wrong? This is, of course, an activity of the king chapter, so that gives you a bit of a clue. But the problem is that we're allowing Black's king to advance forward. So a position that was drawn that didn't allow any kind of counterplay by Black, the king has to stay close to the pawns. Suddenly, the tides change when the Black king comes forward. And I like this chapter in particular because, again, it's such a basic rule. We're all taught starting out that, king activity in the endgame is important, but this book really shows you why. I mean, it demonstrates through practical games what happens when, first of all, you allow your king to get some activity and when you allow your opponent's king. Now, you can take a look at the game. It's more about showing you what has happened and guiding you through the game with some annotation, but not too much, which I think is great because the idea here is just to see what's happening, observe, and hopefully not make the same mistakes, but spend less time just trying to memorize all the theory and just understand what's happening in the game. Rook f8, rook e1, white resigns because we are promoting next. There are lots of games from throughout time, recent, older, great examples to actually learn endgames from, particularly if you are more of a practical learner. And that's all for today. Let us know in the comments which endgame books you would recommend and also which other topics for club players you want us to talk about next. Until then.